Okay, well, I will just say we're inviting Randy Delorey this morning as our Liberal candidate for Antigonish County in this provincial election. Just in for a little meet and greet, give a little info out for the students, and just on the voting side, it's great to have you here this morning.
I really appreciate the invitation. I think it's fantastic what you guys are doing in the student union to take this opportunity and try to encourage as well as educate and inform students here. And I'm sure if you put it up online, it can be useful for students even outside and beyond St. FX to get involved, get engaged, and get informed so that they can understand and appreciate the importance of understanding the issues, the platforms, and the importance of casting a ballot.
100%, totally agree with you, and I really appreciate that compliment there, because yeah, really what we are trying to do is just get that message out there that there's no one student issue that's bigger than any other. All students are affected differently, all parties represent a bit differently, but if we can get that information out there for students, and also on the how to vote side, then we really can just bring it together, get a higher participation rate.
That's upcoming. Right. Well, and I think the other thing to pick up on, as you said, no one student issue. I think it's also important to recognize, often in elections, political parties and the media break things down into interest groups, and they say student issues or youth issues or urban issues or rural issues. Personally, I like to think that we're more than a single bucket. A student is not just a student. A student is a resident of Antigonish, and a student is a member of a family, and so their needs and their interests are broader. They have parents and grandparents. Maybe they have grandparents in long-term care. So long-term care and continuing care might be something weighing on students, or some students are parents, and so childcare could be an issue and a concern for those students. So I think it's important that we as politicians, I think media, and it's important for us, while it's easy and convenient for us to talk about buckets, I think it's also important to recognize that every voter is a unique individual that have their needs, and we need to be able to speak to all of them through our platform and our commitments.
For sure. That's a really powerful statement, honestly, Randy. Just as we can see that obviously there is divides in certain issues, but at the same time, bringing that statement back to saying, really, you're a resident of Antigonish County, you are part of this family, and we all need to be moving in a certain direction together, making sure that everybody's taken care of. That's a powerful statement. I really appreciate that. So just to start off, just wondering if you could just tell us like a little bit about yourself, just like hobbies, like hometown kind of stuff, family side of things, maybe some school. Totally up to you.
Sure. No, I appreciate that. It's interesting getting involved in politics, how important it is to many voters that they actually know and understand. As important as the policy and the platforms are, many people really want to know that they can relate to, and that the politician is accessible and can understand their needs and wants. So as the representative for the past 2 terms in Antigonish as the MLA, my background, I grew up here just east of town in a little community called Heatherton. 2 siblings, just an average middle-class family. Father's a mechanic, my mother's a teacher. Mom was a Dutch immigrant family. My dad's family's been here for many generations. The Delorey family, we trace it back quite far, right back to France when they came over. So have a little bit of both, kind of the long, deep roots on the Acadian side, and then a Dutch immigrant, 1950s post-war connection to community, but very much a strong family. Both my parents, almost all of my aunts and uncles are still living in and around the Antigonish area. Nice. So family is really important to me. I've got 4 children. My wife and I live down in Monastery now, so we're still living down east. As far as education, obviously I went to schools here in Antigonish, including St. FX. I studied actually in the information systems program, and graduated during the .com era. So I had a really great opportunity with the education I got here at St. FX to work in the IT sector at a really important juncture, and I learned a lot through that. I worked on enterprise systems in the telecommunications sector as well as the automotive sector down in Michigan. So I have international experience, and as well as kind of a really hot area that just continued to grow in telecommunications. Did my own thing, actually started my own business doing consulting, but also partnered with a guy to do some mobile game development back before the App Store was invented.
Okay.
So as soon as that came along, we knew our work was done, but it was nice to be able to know we were looking at and seeing trends. But I continued my education. I was always a proponent of education. I loved my time here at St. Evax. I've always enjoyed school and learning. So I got my master's when I was living in New Brunswick at UDM, Université de Moncton, and had the opportunity to teach a part-time class at Mount Allison and fell in love with it. It was my first course in the business faculty up there. And the following summer, became aware of a position here at St. Evax. So I was a business faculty here from 2017 until I was first elected in 2013. And I can say I absolutely loved my time here as a faculty member as much as I did as a student. It's a phenomenal experience, a phenomenal educational institution. And I think to the topic we're here today to talk about is civic engagement and elections. If you look, I mean, we're here in the Mulrooney Hall, and and in the Schwartz building, there's the McKenna Center. I mean, two of Canada's greatest modern political icons across the political spectrum. They're not on the same side, right? A conservative and a liberal, but both walked the same pathways that students today are walking. The same pathways I walked when I was a student here. Our MP, Sean Fraser, walked the same pathways, and so we really, I think, in Antigonish and here at St. Evax, there's something in the water that breeds a commitment to public service and civic engagement. I just referenced a number of people, and it's only a small swath of those ex-grads that have run successfully for public office. But that doesn't even begin to scratch the surface of the number of public servants, both politically, provincially and federally, that are working to support whatever government is in power to design and implement public policy that affects every Nova Scotian, every Canadian. And so, again, I think the work that you're doing here to get the work is carrying on that tradition of civic engagement. So, my background didn't come from a political family, regular middle class, but in 2013 I was asked to serve my community. I agreed to step back from my academic career to provide service, and the Antigonish constituents asked me and sent me back to serve in 2017. So again, here in 21, they've asked me again to step up and serve. So I've put my name forward again. And we'll see on August 17th if I'm the candidate that Antigonish still wants to serve them at the provincial level.
It's fantastic. I really appreciate learning a bit more about that background about yourself, because I agree with you. I think it's really important for a community to really understand who their candidates and who their leaders are, even in all senses of the word. And I agree with you in the sense that St. Evax students, and that's one thing that I've really seen in my time here, is that this school really does foster a feeling of, I want to help build my community. I'm living for all these other people around me at the same time. So I find that a really valiant cause, and that's fantastic that this place helped foster those beliefs. And that kind of drives me into my second question here, and that's kind of about what got you into politics in the first place. Was it that feeling, or was there something else that really got you wanting to dive into that world?
It's an interesting question. When I get asked, not in quite such a public forum, but in kind of private conversations fairly frequently. It's a number of factors, I think, and it probably is for everyone who gets involved. Not everyone, but many people. I mean, I think there are people who realize from a young age that politics is the career they want. Whether that is necessarily as a politician, but it could be in working for a political party or in public service, but somewhere in that space. That was never on my radar. I grew up, the education system here in Antigonish, and again, I think the area has a lot of politically engaged people, not just on campus, but in our primary and high school level as well. So there's always conversations in and around the community. I was always tried to stay informed and engaged. I had one friend in particular who was from a young age. She came from a politically engaged and partisan family. And so I always loved talking to her. I still remember when she came in with her young Liberal card in high school and was so excited. I had no idea what it was. So I learned through other people, and it was always fascinating. But as far as my family, we weren't political. I have no idea what way my parents ever voted. But what I did know is my parents always voted, whether it was municipal, provincial, federal. I knew they voted. I knew who our representative was, although I'd never met them. But I knew the work that they did was important. So that's kind of just me as a citizen, knowing how important public service is. But back in about 2010, there was an effort. The regional school board was closing some schools, including ones that my children were going to be attending. I dug into it a little bit, took a little bit of exception to the information they were using to rationalize the decision. I think there were some contradictions and so forth in there. Started to learn more about the political process, legislation, regulations governing it, but also how board members were making decisions, the administrative role versus the elected officials' role. And so I was quite engaged and active, might be an understatement. And I guess that people would have considered was political involvement, but not in a partisan way. But I did become involved with the Liberal Party during that point in time because they asked me to. Someone with the party locally said that the party was having a policy meeting up in Halifax to talk about policy positions, and one of the topics was education. They knew I was pretty informed and had some opinions. And so they invited me. So I got a Liberal membership to attend that policy session. Nice. And I thought it was fantastic. I mean, it was just regular Nova Scotians. When we think about political parties, and we think about, it's just regular people from all walks of life. There's doctors and lawyers, yes, but there's mechanics, and there's grandmothers and grandfathers, and there's young parents and people without children. But there's all walks of life were there, and they all shared a common goal of wanting to discuss how they could make the province better. And that is what the political party system was. So that was just my engagement and first kind of engagement in a partisan way with the political party. But I didn't consider myself partisan. I was there because someone asked me to attend and provide my input at that event. But then, as time went on and a provincial election approached, I was asked to run by a number of people at different points in time. And I initially said no, I'll be honest. I did what I think a lot of people do. You do the pros and cons. I was a tenured track professor here at St. Evex. My wife was pregnant with our third child. I was just starting my thesis for my PhD. I was on the track with my dream job. And people asked me to, and I mentioned it to my wife just in one of those evening conversations after we put the boys to bed. And I said, "Hey, want to know something funny? In the last 2 weeks, multiple people have asked me to run." And I'm like, and I'm like, "Isn't that kind of funny?" And she said, "What did you say?" And my response was, "What do you think I said?" I said, "No." And I'll be honest. That's what I thought my wife wanted me to say. Right. This is though the juncture that changed everything in the course of my career. She said, "Why? Why did you say no?" And I told her, and she said, "But you'd be good at it." She felt that I would make a good representative. Again, she doesn't come from a political background, political family. She never got involved in the party when I did for the policy perspective, but she did believe I would be a good representative. And notwithstanding the personal sacrifices my children have made to allow me to run, she is the person who gave me the motivation, the the willingness to accept those sacrifices, because every single name on a ballot, whatever political party, they can't do it themselves.
Right.
And especially for people who have a family, whether it's a young family or if you have an aging parents that you need to you're a caregiver for. Both of those circumstances, you have people that rely on you.
Yeah.
You can't do this job without sacrificing your time with them. So anyway, I said yes, and the rest is history. I was nominated in August, mid-August of 2013. 10 days later, I hosted Justin Trudeau. A week after in Antigonish at the Legion. 10 days later, the writ dropped. A month later, I was elected. 3 weeks after that, I was appointed to cabinet as the Minister of Environment and Gaelic Affairs. 18 months later, I was finance minister, tabled a balanced budget, tabled a second balanced budget, re-elected in 17, and put in as Minister of Health and Wellness. It's been a heck of a ride, and but it all started from people just asking.
Yeah.
And I think that's how we get people engaged. You have to ask them. You have to let them know that their voice matters, that their opinion matters, that their vote matters. And so it was a long story as to how and why I got involved, but that's what it was.
Well, and honestly, I think that's a story that needs to be told in its entirety, because what a powerful story. Like, just keying in on some things in there, I really like the way that you speak about parties, as in just being groups of people coming together in order to table policies that are going to help this province and help this community. And I believe that all parties that's exactly what they are. They are groups of well-meaning people, and it just depends on policies in place and honestly who ends up stepping up and wanting to represent that group. So it is fantastic, and congratulations on making that choice, because there's a lot of people here that are definitely better off for it.
Thank you.
So I'll take it over to my next question. It's kind of getting into a bit more of the key issues in this election. So really, there are a number of key issues facing Nova Scotians and youth in particular, this election season. So it's really just, what issues or challenges are you seeing as the largest coming up?
Sure. There's a variety. Obviously, COVID is one, because we're not out of the woods. And I know coming into the election, and even now, it certainly feels that way to a large degree, because how well we're doing here in Nova Scotia. Yeah. But if you're actually following the trends, and as a former health minister, I can't help myself but continue to read up and stay on top of things. You are seeing major outbreaks and concerns of a fourth wave. You're seeing it in Florida. You're seeing it start up, rear its head up in Alberta. So these are concerns that public health officials are keeping an eye on. So we do have to remain diligent to keep people safe. I mean, we have to remember that in particular, there isn't an approved vaccine for young children yet. So it's absolutely critical that as many Nova Scotians as possible, and as many people in Nova Scotia as possible, do get fully vaccinated. Because if you're eligible to be vaccinated, that does help reduce the chance of spread to those who are ineligible for vaccination, and those are often young children, and that's an important thing to keep our children safe, especially with the school season coming up in September. So that again, we're not out of the woods yet. Again, things are feeling good, and I don't want to be too pessimistic on that, but that's an issue we can't take our eye off the ball, I guess, is the point.
For sure.
But beyond that, I mean, if we think in kind of the more traditional context, because we're making our way, we've done a lot of good things with COVID, and it was a privilege to serve as the health minister during the first wave of COVID. So, it was incredible to work with Dr. Strang and the other public health officials. And I think people don't recognize often enough the public servants as well behind the health system and the health authorities that worked to get approvals and find the money to invest into the programs and supports and all of the things that we did uniquely to get through the pandemic. Beyond that, though, I mean, there's always healthcare broadly is always a topic of priority. And again, that doesn't matter what your age is. The healthcare system is critical to us. Mental health services as part of the healthcare system, all of those things. I mean, there's a reason why almost half of our budget gets spent on healthcare, because it is the single most important, and it always is. And if there's one thing I've learned serving as Minister of Health is it's far more complicated than anybody outside the system can ever appreciate. And I put myself into that category, thinking that, especially coming from a business and a management systems background, I'm like, I should be able to drive efficiency and make things happen. But it is so complex. I don't believe that there is a single industry that is as complex as the healthcare system for the wide variety of professionals and expertise and needs and situations. It is an extremely complex system. But that said, I'm proud of the record we have over the last number of years, tackling important issues, including doctor recruitment. During my tenure, I worked to stabilize the number of people registered for need of family practice. It peaked at that time in the fall of 2018. For the next year and a bit, it actually declined almost every month. We hit the lowest number of Nova Scotians registered for a family physician since the list was created in about July of 2020. And then you started to see it increase, but we know it was increasing because one of the initiatives that I brought in partnership with the Minister of Immigration was a dedicated path of recruitment for international and streamlined recruitment for international physicians and healthcare providers. Well, with the COVID restrictions, our borders got blocked. So there was a buildup of potential and qualified physicians can't come into the province right now. I think Ian Rankin mentioned in the Leaders Debate on CBC, there's 70 to 80 physicians ready to come to Nova Scotia when the border restrictions ease, and that that will help address that backlog of people. It doesn't solve the problem right now, but there is no instant solution. The other important thing is that we don't just look at the short-term solutions like recruitment and financial incentives, which we've put in place. You're not going to solve a shortage of professionals unless you train more professionals. And we're the only province during my tenure to add additional medical seats and residency seats for our medical program for both family physicians and specialists. We've expanded the nurse practitioner program and introduced financial compensation to facilitate RNs to do this upgrading. So they don't have to lose their salary. We cover their salary so they can study full time if they go back to a rural community to help us offset the healthcare needs in those communities. We've expanded the residency program. We've added seats to Cape Breton University and Dalhousie's Yarmouth nursing program. And in this election, we're committed to adding more seats at our community college for CCA and LPN training in the healthcare professions. So we're focused on the training, and it's not an instant solution, but anybody who tells you that challenges in the healthcare system have an instant or easy, the Staples easy button solution, you've got to take that with a big grain of salt, because I've been there. I know even when you do the things that professionals on the front line ask you to do, there are other professionals who disagree. And so you're going to be, sometimes criticized for doing something you were asked to do by someone else in the system who disagrees and thinks you should have done something different. And it's seldom that you get lauded for doing the thing that you were asked to do in the first place. So it is really complex. It's really complicated, but I'm really proud of the work that I was able to do with the teams throughout the health system. And when it comes to mental health, I'm really, really proud that our platform includes a commitment to introduce walk-in mental health clinics throughout the province. This is something that was piloted up in Halifax, in the north end of Halifax. It's probably about 2 years now, so it's coming up to probably the 2 years mark. And it's had good results. But in addition, Newfoundland was a little bit ahead of us with a pilot program, and I have a great relationship with my former colleague there, Minister John Hagee, actually Minister Doctor. And they've had some clinics and have had fantastic results. So quite confident and optimistic about what these services will do to complement, take some pressure off our existing mental health system, but most importantly, make sure that people in Nova Scotia who know that they can get the care they need just by walking in, and really mitigate those risks of a challenging time turning into a mental health crisis.
Oh, for sure. And yeah, just looking at like mental health and healthcare as a whole, it really came to the forefront during the pandemic, obviously, and that was another large thing for students, which I can get to later. Actually, I might actually get into this question right now if you're all right with it, because that was one of the large areas of issue that we saw for students this year in specific was kids were disproportionately affected by the isolation, by the pandemic, and in mental health in that specific way, just because we saw a complete increase in students that were reporting a new mental affliction or existing mental health concerns that had become further exacerbated. So that was one big thing that I think is at the forefront of students' minds right now. Yeah. So our question along that lines is just that mental health support being such a pressing issue for students and youth, in your opinion, what are some of the ways in which government can ensure the mental health of youth and Nova Scotians as a whole is being prioritized?
So as I said earlier, the mental health walk-in clinics is a big part of that. For sure. And again, the results were quite substantive in Newfoundland in terms of addressing the needs earlier. And I think this is the fundamental principle. If you can address the needs earlier before something becomes a crisis for an individual and an actual emergency, then they can get rebalanced, get the feet on the ground, so to speak, figuratively speaking. And then the people who need lower acuity counseling services can be served that way, leaving our higher specialized psychiatrists for the most acute mental health care needs. Whereas right now, almost everyone is kind of tried to be channeled through and up to the highest level of care,
for sure.
Which then leads to some wait lists. But we have seen improvements. Even before the pandemic, we were improving our wait lists. One of the things that I know occurred during the pandemic, obviously a fairly rapid shift to providing clinical care virtually and entering into a financial agreement with Doctors Nova Scotia to provide those services. And I was the Minister of Health when we moved that through and did those negotiations. And I'll just make the note, it seems like that was something that we just did instantly, but we had just signed a contract in the fall of 2019, and we had extensive discussions about virtual care. We just didn't get it to the point that we had an agreement, but we did have in that contract a commitment that both parties would continue to work on this. So the pandemic was building on discussions that we had had over the 18 months before the pandemic. So this was a path we were on already. But as it relates specifically to mental health, one of the things I'd heard from the mental health and addictions team coming out of the first wave, as we were trying to assess, how did things go? We slowed down, obviously, in-person care, except for the most critical in all areas of the health system, so that the system was ready, because we didn't know what was going to happen with COVID cases. We saw Italy being overrun, Montreal, New York, so we had to be prepared for that in Nova Scotia. But out of all of the areas with virtual care, the feedback from the mental health and addictions team was the highest. They had indicated that the number of no-shows actually decreased dramatically. People were showing up virtually for their clinical sessions at a far higher rate than they did in person. And you may wonder, why is that? And I don't know that the research is completed. Again, everything's kind of in real time. But some of the hypotheses that were put forward was the notion that, let's just, if you know someone who suffered from anxiety or depression, and I'm talking severe, where they can struggle to get out of bed some days. If you can't get out of bed, how are you going to make it to the doctor's office? If you're struggling to get out of bed in your own home, but you manage to do that, you're just building the anxiety to get out of your house, to take the transit, to enter a public space, the doctor's office, the clinician's office, to get that care. And that can become overwhelming at the time that you need it the most. But if you can get yourself out of bed or just pull together the phone, you might be able to get that care anyway, and so again, that's kind of the hypothesis that there's just feeling safer in their home when they're making the virtual connection either through the phone or a video conference link with their mental health clinician. So I think those services are here to stay. We've seen some of the benefits. I know early on we had a lot of concerns about the risk of increased suicides and overdose, particularly with opioids. But the fact is, coming out of Wave 1 in Nova Scotia, our data actually showed that we were trending, I would say not outside of the average, but it was actually down year over year for both opioid overdose and suicides. So, there's still a lot of work to be done there. But those wraparound services that we've rolled out in Nova Scotia for the pandemic, particularly around mental health services, I think did play a positive effect. There were jurisdictions that did see increases in both overdose deaths and suicides, but we weren't one of them. At least as of August or so of last year. I haven't checked the data since I left the portfolio more recently, but so I think those are things that again, it's top of mind for everyone. And has been for the last 8 years for us as a government. You mentioned youth. We know mental health, particularly when it's a chronic condition, more severe issues, does begin to present itself in adolescence. So the earlier you can identify, the earlier you can intervene, the earlier you can work with the individual to help build the resilience and the tools to support themselves, because they're going to need that throughout their life. I mean, there are times when you're well and there are times when you're unwell, just like you are with your physical health. But if you can identify the triggers or the mechanisms and have the tools. So a lot of our investments over the last 8 years, you actually see some in the health system, but you see a lot of them actually in our education system that we've been investing in, including at the university level. There was work with labor and advanced education, not directly in the health system, with some digital tools for mental wellness that was being piloted and worked on here in Nova Scotia. And I think actually I mentioned Newfoundland. I think some of that work actually built on some stuff that Newfoundland had done earlier as well. Yeah,
that suite of e-mental health tools through, yes, that would have been through the labor and advanced education. Yes. But yeah, Healthy Minds and Us, it's what... it was actually and partly brought to government through Students Nova Scotia, which kind of just does demonstrate if you can start to as you were saying, build in that facility, that access, so that it's just, if you can only make it so far and get yourself up in the morning, and then we can actually provide access at that point, and being proactive as well with the walk-ins and just being able to identify sooner, and also being able to self-identify, as you were saying. It's very important.
And taking down the stigma. I think it's great that this is an area of questioning you're bringing up. You guys wouldn't be aware of this, but one of the most poignant, memorable, I won't say easy, but memorable experiences that I've had in my political career was actually the Candidates Forum, which was hosted here on campus in 2013. And they went to the floor for questions, and there was a student who shared his personal story, and it's a gut punch. And just asked, what are you going to do? What are you going to do to strengthen mental health supports on campus? And I remember my response. I don't know that I was a great politician then. I don't think I'm much better now. But I actually told him I don't know. I honestly don't know. All I could answer was I don't know what we can do to have prevented the situation that he found himself in, and others would have on here at St. Vax and other campuses, and even in the community. Again, it's not just a student issue, but in this case it was a student asking, and I said I don't know what we're going to do to be able to solve it, but I know we need to do more. And we've been really investing in from high school and junior high school levels. We've rolled out an adolescent outreach model in our school system. So that's, again, you don't see it in the health budget, you see it in our education budget. And we have over, I think, 150 or 170 schools now that have this model that provides programs in a non-judgmental way, builds the relationships. So these people with clinical backgrounds build relationships with youth so they can see if they need intervention, and then they have the relationship so that people feel comfortable, and it's to help them with anything and everything from anxiety, depression, individuals who may be struggling with gender identity or bullying. Any of those things all get caught up in these program services, and they have the relationships with community and health system supports and resources in and around their community, so then they can be the liaison and help connect people and build those bridges and stuff. So again, there's a lot of stuff out there that I think is important for people to know, and I thank you for asking the question so we can bring it to people.
Oh, for sure. And another big thing that we found in our research with students is that, on the mental health side of things, it had gotten a lot worse for a lot of folks. But some of that was actually offset, or was kind of running down from financial insecurity, financial stress. Affordability is a big aspect for students, especially looking at tuition, looking at supplies. Also housing is another big one. So it kind of just brings us into a bit more of an affordability question, because we know that it's one of the main challenges for youth, but also all Nova Scotians at the same time. So it was just kind of along the lines of what are some of the ways in which you and your party want to support students to ensure that those financial barriers aren't the be-all, end-all of us having a successful degree?
You bet.
Yeah.
Great to make that connection between one's financial stability and social stability,
sure.
and one's mental health. Very insightful. And so from a student perspective, as it relates to tuition, we've already brought in tuition student loan forgiveness program.
Yeah.
So it can forgive up to 5 years of your Nova Scotia student loan for students. It's on the back end, so you pay it up front. But part of that is to maintain the incentive of actually finishing degrees and so forth. For students that may have learning challenges and needs or circumstances that recognize may require a longer duration, there is a program that does the same but allows a longer period of time to complete your degree. So it recognizes that inclusiveness that's needed, and I think our academic institutions are working to improve as well. So we recognized it when we rolled out this program to say, if there are people who are going to need more time, we provide that flexibility. But the standard is, I think, 5 years to complete your degree. We're also working to expand seats in programs, and again, with more seats, you can hopefully deliver them a little more economically, particularly in our community colleges.
Yeah.
But then as you move from that, you're looking then into, I think probably the biggest one and the one that gets talked about the most is housing affordability. And really the only move to improve affordability of housing, you go back to your Economics 100 class, and you've got profs here, you can go ask them if they can think of something better, but it is fundamentally supply and demand. If you have more supply than there is demand, the people who own the supply are going to lower the price to incentivize people to take their property.
Right.
If you have more demand than there is supply of housing, then people are going to be willing to pay more to get that limited supply. So if we want to shift the balance, we need to get more housing stock. Mm-hmm. And across the province, provincially, we've initiated a housing commission that had both private sector developers but also nonprofit organizations that came together arm's length. It was not government involvement. They took the time from about October, November of 2020. They released their report in June of this year. Made several recommendations, including a recommendation of an immediate $25 million injection to help support housing on top of existing programs. Yes. A new $25 million. We before the election, we made that commitment. We followed through with it, so it's part of this year's financial rollout. And then a number of other things, working with municipalities to address some of the regulatory burdens of zoning and things to build more stock. Now, if I bring that a little bit more close to Antigonish, I want to say, as the MLA for Antigonish, the Antigonish Affordable Housing Society actually reached out to me in, I think, 2014, introduced themselves, and I got to know them. I knew many of the members individually, but I didn't know about this organization until they reached out. And we chatted, and it turned out that they had been an organization and been concerned with affordability of housing in Antigonish for about 25 years.
Wow.
But they had not built a single unit. So they came to me and were looking for what or how we could work with the provincial government.
Yeah.
So I did that. I mean, that's one of the things I do as an MLA. You help individuals and organizations in your community get connected to government programs and services.
Yeah.
And so I connected them with some existing programs, made the contacts with the appropriate people, and the organization managed to build their first 4 units up off of Hawthorne and Riverside Estates. One of the great things about our existing program, we help lower the capital cost up front, so a one-time injection into the nonprofit organization. For-profit players can do this as well, but they have to commit to a couple of things. They had to have a certain number of accessible units, so we want to make sure that it's not just housing, but housing for everybody. So they have, in those first 4 units, 2 are accessible on the main floor, and then 2 upstairs obviously have stairs, not an elevator, but that half of the stock was accessible, and all of them were affordable, and a nonprofit organization. And when we announced it shortly after, they announced their intention to build another 10 units. I'm like, boy, it took 25 years to get 4. How long is it going to take us to get another 10? It was between 18 and 24 months later, they had another 10 units built right next door. Now, that didn't happen because of just the provincial government. It didn't happen just because of me as the MLA. It didn't happen just because of the Antigonish Affordable Housing Society. It happened because those individuals on the Affordable Housing Society and the volunteers changed over the 25 years, but because they were persistent, they were engaged, I was able to work with them and connect them to government programs and services. The municipality, I want to recognize and acknowledge both the town and the county who also participated and supported these initiatives as well. And so that's 14 units within a few years of working with this organization. And they have another dozen units down by the junior high and the elementary school on Appleseed. If you see the developments there on your way up to the Superstore Market Square there, those 4 units, 4 buildings with 12 units are actually a part of the Antigonish Affordable Housing Society, and they'll be opened up by the end of this year. Wow. So we've got over 24 units now in Antigonish, but we didn't wait until it's the narrative and read about it in the newspaper. We've been working on this, well, some people for 25 years, myself as MLA for the last 6 or 7, and the progress has been good. There's more work to be done. And it's not all about the nonprofit affordability sector. Private sector has a role to play here too, because as more people move into new opportunities, well, we have some condo developments on Main Street that were opened up in the last couple of years. There's 2 more buildings, one by the Wheel and one on Main Street there that are just in the process of opening up, retail on the main floor and accommodations upstairs. So we're adding more stock. There's a big development on Church Street, the corner just past Church and St. Ninian. That's a fairly large complex, so we're getting housing stock here in Antigonish. So that should help reduce some of the pressure anyway on prices here in Antigonish, but we may need more. And that's why that Housing Commission report from June, which will support, at least based upon the experts that gave us the advice, should support the encouragement of more private, for-profit, but also non-profit and affordable housing units throughout the province.
And love hearing all that stuff on the housing side of things, and also on making the school aspect more economical. But understandable, and also in economics 101, as you were saying, we were taught that if you're going to want to help that housing supply, that housing costs drop back down, you really do need to flood with supply so that you can start bringing that back down. So I think that it's a good effort, and it's a good goal to continue working on.
And we did have again, COVID does throw, and it's an easy thing to just throw things as a COVID issue. But the cost of building supplies and materials has ballooned during COVID. In the last month or so, it started to drop. Excuse me, but price of lumber and building supplies really skyrocketed during COVID because people had a lot of disposable income. You're not traveling, so you're renovating. Spending more time at home, you're renovating. So people were putting a lot of pressure there. You start to see that come down as we've been coming out, and people are a little more optimistic, thinking about some travel and other things. So hopefully that will also spur some more development as those building costs come down.
For sure. So another like little affordability on the side of affordability is employment for students. It's seen like a lot of worry in terms of how students were affected work-wise in the pandemic. So we saw that we were heavily hit, the hardest hit in terms of employment, but also one of the slowest to rebound from that. So as a result, we're kind of seeing that out-migration issue where a lot of us would come here, like students that are coming from out of province, students that are coming internationally, even students that are from right here in Antigonish or just outside areas in Nova Scotia, want to stay here. It's beautiful. We love it here. But the issue is that it's also for some young people especially, they need to leave to find work because they might not be able to have it here, or are here for their 4 years but can't get that work experience throughout the summer to be able to build their resume to be able to stay here. We were just kind of wondering, like, as a province, like how can we better support and incentivize like that student retention after the fact?
So that was actually a big issue that we worked on as a government when we came in 2013. When we came in, the out-migration was very real. Our population had been declining for decades because our youth were leaving. And actually, if you looked at our population, there was this huge inverted V in the 23-ish years, and you start to see it coming back in kind of retirement age, 55 plus. You started to see our population grow a little bit, and that was people who might have been from here and they're coming back to retire. But we were losing that critical core of people who would spend their careers, build their careers here, right? Settle and build their families, and that would help our population growth and all of those things. So we took a two-pronged strategy. One was focused on immigration, and that was also in partnership with the federal government with the Syrian refugee situation. That helped us as well. And so our immigration minister, Lena Diab, was an absolute workhorse when it came to immigration. Let's put it this way. I've spoken to federal immigration ministers, and she's recognized as one of the most fierce advocates to support and improve both immigration and also the retention of those immigrants in our province. And we've seen our retention rate actually go up. We've seen our immigration numbers go up. And as a result, we've seen our population start to increase. Over the last number of years, we've hit our highest population counts ever. That has led to pre-pandemic lowest unemployment rates on record, highest employment rates, and things. But that's just on the immigration side.
Yeah.
Often already people who are established professionals. So we had the other prong, which was, as you've noted, we have this great supply. Our 10 universities and our NSCC campuses bring students in from outside of our province. What a great way. They've already spent 4 or 5 years here. What a great way to build our workforce and our population. But when we engaged, because there was a program the previous government had brought in, but it wasn't working. We were spending over $50 million a year on this program. 75% of it was going to people 30 years and older. Okay. So people working on their masters, not undergraduate students. So it wasn't helping the people it was intended to. I think best intentions. I'm not slagging the program for believing it would do what they wanted to do. The problem was you have to be willing to evaluate those programs, and if they're not working, be willing to adjust. So we adjusted it into a program called Graduate to Opportunities and Innovate to Opportunities. And that's a program because we talked to students and said, why are you leaving? And the main theme was exactly what you said. They're looking for employment. They want to stay, but there's no employment. And then I'm like, well, if there's no employment, I mean, there's no employment. There's jobs posted. Yeah, but those jobs, I'll say 3 to 5 years work experience, and I don't have 3 to 5 years work experience. I have to go away. And many go away with the intention to come back, but in those 3 to 5 years after graduating, many start families, their roots settle down, and they never make it back until they retire. So then we go talk to employers like, hey, employers, why do you have 3 to 5 years work experience? I mean, it's an entry-level job. We've got all these graduates, and we're missing out on them. And their response was, and I mean, I'm simplifying it, but effectively, the productivity of an employee in their first job as you transition from education into the workforce is less than an employee moving from one position to another. So they figured, well, it's too expensive to start with a new graduate. We would rather someone else do that investment. Right. And as long as they were able to fill the position, what did matter? We had high unemployment because we didn't have the population,
Right.
so that, supply and demand again. So they did require that level of experience. So our new policy, Graduate to Opportunities, came in and said, okay, we will incentivize employers to create a new job for an entry-level new graduate, community college or university, and we'll pay up to 25% of their first year's salary. Right? If you're not getting as much productivity, we'll help offset it. And then we'll pay 12.5% in the second year. So we help offset that concern that they had. And it worked. I mean, they started hiring, and these were new jobs. And then all of a sudden we started to see more youth stay. We saw youth coming here from away, or Nova Scotians who might have studied elsewhere but saw job opportunities. So those are the things we've done. Now we've got to evaluate and look at that through the COVID lens as we come out of COVID, see where employers are. But certainly a lot of the employers I've spoken to, there are jobs. So I'm not sure where that disconnect is between the students not matching those jobs. So we're going to have to do a little more analysis and looking at that. Because coming out of the private sector industry, they're saying, they've got jobs, they can't fill them. And that's across the country and much of the world, I think. So we need to find out where that mismatch is and get the right policies in there. But in addition, one of the policies we're committed to in this platform, though, obviously continuing those programs that we already have that showed that they worked over the last couple of years, is a commitment to 150 co-op placements. So that as students, as you say, you have to get that work experience even to build your resume. Co-op programs have been shown to be very effective, great opportunity for students. And so an additional 150 co-op placements that we'll be able to work with and deliver those opportunities while you're studying.
It is fantastic, and that's like, you touched on it perfectly. It's kind of that issue where they're compounding each other, where you want to stay, but then it's like, okay, like let me go look for these jobs. Okay, maybe I don't have that experience for that one because I didn't have the opportunity back in my second, third, whatever year it was. So yeah, I think that's definitely one of the things that for students, if that opportunity is there, it's just needs to be communicated and acted on, right? And
one tip, if I may, this is more from my days as a faculty advisor here at St. FX and working with some of the students.
I'm sure people appreciate it.
Yeah, just a little tip, and this will be at any point during your careers. When it comes to your CV and your resume, when you're looking for work, I find a lot of people, and not just students who are graduating, but even later in people's careers, they look at the degree they have and then they go to look for a job that lists their degree. And I want to encourage students to think about their skills and not just their degree. I'll use a perfect example, two examples. One is a good friend of mine. He went right on from undergraduate to his master's degree. And I was already in the private sector. I didn't do my master's right away. So, he came up to my place the week he had just finished, and I still remember he was so excited on the Friday when he showed up. I got my master's. I'm ready to hit the world. And then by Sunday, I'll say he was less enthusiastic. As it dawned on him and he was leaving, he said, and I'm like, well, what happened? I'm so excited. And he came in and then it's like, it just dawned on me. What do I do with a master's in math? But here's the really interesting thing. The next week there was a job posting and the headline was mathematician and required a master's in math. So he kind of fell into it, even though when he studied what he wanted to study, but he didn't actually think about what he could do with the job. Right. But it's actually in the IT sector that he's using his math degree. Nice. But the other area that I think a lot is, teachers. For a number of years, there were far more teachers than there were teaching opportunities. That's not the case today. But a lot of teachers think, well, my only job opportunity is teaching in a school, and that's the jobs that they always look for. And it's probably what most of the people want to do in those careers, because that's why you obviously took your education degree. But in the private sector, many large organizations have their own training departments. And so having someone with an education degree and background and experience is very helpful, and it could be anywhere from the IT sector to other sectors that have internal training programs. And so you can design content and things. It's not targeted towards children, but it's a great learning opportunity because you have the skill set. So, that's just two kind of examples to say, you have a skill set. You may not see a job with the title that you specifies, but think about the skills you have. I did a lecture here as MLA. It was an evening guest lecture thing to philosophy students. I was talking to some former colleagues in philosophy department. Said, they're graduating students. They're majors and honors and just philosophy graduates, saying they're getting into the third and fourth year and realizing, where do you get a job in philosophy?
Yeah.
But my point was, I took several philosophy courses in my undergrad, and I maintain to this day they were the most functional, practical courses that served me in my 3 distinct careers. There's an actual module on logic. Well, as a programmer in the IT sector, logic really helped my programming skills in the sector.
Yeah.
And I would say the philosophy course at the principal fundamentals of logic did a better job than my IT technical training on logic itself. Also the writing and the critical thinking. I had to write business reports, make proposals. So the writing and skills that I had there helped me in the business sector. As an academic, critical thinking, the reading and the writing obviously served me, even though my research was in a very different area over in the business side of things and organizations and privacy, but the tools from the philosophy program helped me there. And then as a politician, again, critical thinking, the ability to read and process information. My ethics course, I can assure you, many situations where the population is divided on a particular topic. How do you, and that may be socially or ethically challenging in terms of decisions. Think Northern Pulp just up the road here, an environmental piece, Indigenous First Nations relations, and employment and a sector and affecting lives. Those were not easy decisions to make, but for me, during my tenure, especially as Minister of Environment and at the time early on in that kind of started the trend to that outcome, I really managed personally to get through that by using my fundamental learnings through the ethics course. And I'm going to give a quick shout out to Dr. Steve Baldner, who was my philosophy prof. I still, I'll share with anyone and everyone how influential he and that program has been on my life. So again, I just use that as an example. It wasn't my major, it wasn't the main thing I did, but it gave me skills that have been very practical and applicable to me throughout 3 very distinct careers. And so that is that little piece of advice I just want to encourage students when you're looking at jobs and employment. Don't just look at your degree. Look at the skills you've acquired while you're here through your degree in your formal studies, but also your experience in volunteer work or jobs and so forth. It's the skills that employers are looking for as much as the degree itself.
Yeah, agreed. I think that it's really important because, and what I've seen from a lot of people at this school is that almost everybody that I've met in my life, you're larger than your degree because you're going to end up getting that specific title. And yeah, okay, let's take the master's in math example. Like at that point, you've taken so many courses to get to that point that you are well-rounded as an individual. You have skills in all different areas. It doesn't necessarily say anything about what you can tangibly do. Yeah. So yeah, that's fantastic. So I've got one more question about like the student issue side of things, and it falls on the equity piece. So we know like COVID-19 has disproportionately impacted some groups over others, and further exacerbated existing inequalities in our society. So what kinds of policies, if any, will you and your party pursue to promote that social and racial justice in our community?
Yeah, absolutely phenomenal question, and I just want to acknowledge and again how I'm not surprised that a student from St. FX is asking a question about that because of the history of St. FX and social justice. I mean, the Cody movement and so forth. It's great to see that that's still part of the foundation of what
100%. Yeah, that'll always be a very big part of the foundation here, and it's because, and as you were saying earlier, it's part of that larger community feel. Yeah. We are a family, and we really do want to promote that larger representation and breaking down the bias that exists like in our campuses.
That's right. And so, I mean, to answer this question, I'll probably step it up a bit more to society at large
For sure.
than
Yeah.
specific on campus,
feel
because
free.
I think there's a lot of work to be done.
Yeah.
But we started the work before COVID. I'll say, you know, back when I talked about that ethics course and tough decisions to be made, for people outside of Nova Scotia that may not be familiar with the Home for Coloured Children, probably more familiar with the residential school system. So it would be a situation similar, but it was a home in Nova Scotia for coloured children, and you know, that was managed, and there were many, many issues that came to light about that. And when we came into office, there was a lawsuit filed against the government. It was filed, you know, prior to us coming to office, but there was an active lawsuit.
Okay.
And our premier of the day, the former premier, Stephen McNeil, he basically gave direction to take steps to resolve that lawsuit. You know, as a government, we could have fought perhaps more in court and dragged this out and so forth. But instead, we began with more of a reconciliatory approach to engagement with those affected, and that established an inquiry process that was very unique. It was a restorative process that we took.
Nice.
It was really led by people impacted. We participated, provided the administrative support and so forth, and that resulted in a report. What was interesting about that report, although it came from this one physical location, which affected a generation of young Black Nova Scotians, the recommendations, I believe, go far deeper. I mean, they stem from those experiences, but what they tackled or focused on was, and you can read the report. It's public. It's online. It's fairly detailed, thick. But one of the big pieces that it touches on is the silos, and how some of the effects and why the treatments that continue to occur was people working in silos and saying, well, this isn't my problem, so I'm going to work in my little bailiwick and stuff. And they basically came back saying, you know, government working in silos is part of the problem. That, you know, we design government programs and systems, but they become inflexible. And so it allows sometimes bad things to happen because it falls outside of any one organization or department's or individual's responsibility. Yeah. And so it exists there and in the shadows, so to speak, of accountability and responsibility. And the other is that sometimes we see people falling through the cracks because a particular program doesn't exist for that situation or scenario. But, you know, and so they'll come into one department and then that department says, no, sorry, we don't have the program for your service. Go talk to this department. And so the person has to go call that department, and they say, no, we don't have something, go talk to this. And it becomes the circle of pass the buck, so to speak. And I had a situation like that as a minister of health and wellness. And I brought the learning and this notion of the silos because that's what I was seeing. I'm like, but we have services, not to that exact thing, but we have services in that ballpark. And that department that people sent them to has not for that specific thing, but they do in that ballpark. And this other department does stuff in that ballpark. So none of us have the specific service to that unique situation, but it's a situation we all can realize as citizens is problematic.
Right.
So the solution was for me calling all three of these departments together, saying, okay, what do we have? What do you have? What do you have? And so no one of us could solve the problem, but we all, without creating a new program, we all put a little bit of our existing programs together and addressed the situation for them. And my direction coming out of that was, the next time we have a situation like this, don't tell the citizen to call that other department.
Right.
You need to call the department on, your colleague. This is not another department. That's your colleague as a public servant. Call your colleague and say, we've got a situation. Can we find a solution? Work together.
Yeah.
And that happened. A few months later, I was given a heads up because, when I became aware of that example I was using, it was a situation that came out because of the media. and so we're problem solving, but I made it clear I didn't want that to happen again. I shouldn't learn about things like this through the media. And so they would give me notices when things like, but don't worry, we're calling work. And then all of a sudden I never had that situation. So, the next 18 months serving as Minister of Health and Wellness, it never came back. So I believe that the system improves because we took the silos. And I go back to that's exactly the type of thing that in an equitable society we can do to be responsive. Now, again, broadly, I can say that Ian Rankin, the leader of the Liberal Party, has been very clear. So he came in, and when he became leader, he was obviously Premier as well. And you can go back to the mandate letters he's provided to the ministers to see that this isn't an election promise. This was something he was committed to before the election was called. And my role as Minister of Justice, you can look at mine specifically, it has a mandate to tackle justice, particularly and specifically for African Nova Scotians and Indigenous Nova Scotians, building strategies and programs that ensure that there's more justice coming forward. And so one of those things I managed, I was only minister for a few months, but we committed and invested in the African Nova Scotia Justice Institute, which they have about 6 very specific things that they brought forward. This is a community driven. They brought it forward. We are funding and working in partnership with them, but it is under the community's leadership. Becoming less colonial, less patriarchal, and actually recognizing what community can bring to the table, and rather than what government dictates and tells always, that sometimes we need to embrace and step back and just support rather than dictate. And so I think the African Nova Scotia Justice Institute is a great example of that, and and there's still more work to be done. I believe it or not, my deputy minister of justice was the first African Nova Scotian deputy minister in the province of Nova Scotia.
Wow.
And she's only been in the job about 18 months.
Wow.
And although I only worked with her for about 4 or 5 months, I will say, and I shared this story when we announced the African Nova Scotia Justice Institute, and I acknowledge she absolutely hates being recognized. She's incredibly intelligent, capable. I've, again, only worked with her for a few months, but she's made a mark on me. And one of those marks was there's this policy thing that we were being briefed on. Staff had a recommendation. It was a relationship, something that kind of came from community, but it affected some other justice stakeholders. So we had to, walk that line between what's the right spot for us to land on this policy piece. And if you haven't noticed, I talk and think out loud at the same time. So I'm doing that in this briefing.
No way.
And I walk through the policy to see how would it work in a given situation. I'm theoretically walking through this hypothetical, and I get to the point and I say, so fundamentally, and then you walk away. And my deputy minister, and I still to this day, I've never asked her if she meant for me to hear this, or if it was just one of those times when you use your outside voice instead of your inside voice, because not all deputy ministers are willing to say what they think. They sometimes like to say what they think the minister wants to hear, and she absolutely didn't. But all she said was, it depends on who you are. When I said, kind of got to that last box of what would happen in the policy, and she said, depends on who you are. And it stopped me in my tracks. And I teased apart in conversation with her, and we rolled back my little scenario and I said, okay, what if I was an African Nova Scotian man in this scenario? That's an experience I don't have. So what would be, and she interjected from her own experiences and how that flow that I was walking through on that policy came to a very different outcome. Which I could never, ever have known if I did not have someone who had some lived experience inform me and fill in the blanks and show me that there are different outcomes. And so again, just that one statement, it depends on who you are. But that is the power of the first African Nova Scotian deputy minister head. And we changed that policy. It's not a public policy, I'm not talking about it right now, but it's a policy that was nearly complete. Where I left it is very different than it would have been if not for that conversation.
Yeah.
And I believe it will be ready to roll out very shortly by whatever government is elected.
Mm-hmm.
I would hope that any government that comes in, staff have the policy, everyone will roll it out. I believe, again, it's this justice, and tackling injustices and equity in our society. It's not a partisan issue.
No.
It should not be. It absolutely shouldn't be a partisan issue. This is a human issue. It's a moral issue. It's an ethical issue. So I know that our leader Ian Rankin is committed to this. It's shown very clearly in his mandates. I personally am very committed and passionate about this. I've been so proud of the work that I've had the opportunity to do just in a few short months at the Justice Department. And look forward to it because I know the amount of work that's still left to be done.
Yeah.
And so again, I just use those as lengthy stories, but they just shows these are complicated things. The issues have built up over centuries. The way that I look at it is to tackle them fundamentally. People in power have to be willing, number one, to acknowledge. I mean, if you're looking at any leader or a candidate for a position, if they're not willing to at least acknowledge and recognize that inequities exist, that systemic issues exist in our government and our society, then they're never going to be able to solve the problem. So you have to be willing to acknowledge. You have to truly acknowledge. Then you have to engage, because and educate yourself. Because if you don't hear from those impacted and affected, again, I used a very specific example how that actually happens, and as a minister, it actually affected the outcome. And then you have to be willing to act.
Right.
So you have to listen to learn about the issues and the experiences and what we can do to solve them. And then, listening isn't enough. You have to follow up with action. And I think there have been many, many cases where governments, especially at election time, have made promises and commitments. Again, I'll use, Boat Harbour, 3 to 4 previous governments made commitments, often very close to an election cycle, and to close Boat Harbour as an effluent treatment facility, and we're the only ones that followed through. Again, I go back to what I learned in the fundamentals here in Antigonish as a community. My family, obviously, in terms of your word being your bond, and again the social lens and moral and ethical frameworks that were built in me and educated here at St. Evax. All of those things came together to give us the fortitude, the compassion, and the commitment to make difficult decisions, but the right decisions to tackle historical injustices. And again, there's a whole lot of work to be done, but we're committed to doing so.
Yeah, I love the points that you brought up, because I think that it really does change a lot. That one sentence, depends who you are. And I found specifically, like in a lot of the people that I've known, and specifically like in myself, in the last 2 years, ever since I've been here, so put it that way, 3, just seeing that, looking at things from different perspectives and being one to listen. And you're completely right. Erase the silos and allow for collaboration, allow for listening, and for those who are impacted to really weigh in on how they have been affected by certain situations and where do we go from here?
Exactly.
How do I help you?
Yeah, exactly.
Because there's some of us that just by being in the position that you were born into, you have a better ability to go out and help.
Yeah.
So by standing back and listening first, it really can be that piece that's needed, and allowing for those impacted really just to have their voice heard.
Yeah. And your last comment, their voice heard. Sometimes those of us in positions of power, whether it's formal power like an elected official, or more of a societal empowerment based upon whether it's class or race or what have you, position, often rush to say how I'm going to fix your problem,
right? Rather
than how I have to understand your problem and challenges and issues and system issues to and how do you want me to work with you to solve these things. And that's why I say you have to listen and engage, and you have to understand the circumstances, and sometimes, you know, the best thing you can do is to not speak up. Well, I don't know if that's the right term, not speak up, but what I mean by not speak up is to allow other people's voices to be heard.
Exactly.
And you do that by not speaking up.
Yeah.
Sometimes, obviously in an allied role, sometimes speaking up is an important thing to draw attention and so forth if you have that capacity in your position. But at other times you have to know, I guess, let me rephrase this perhaps. You have to know when you should be speaking up and when you need to step back to allow other voices the opportunity and the platform to have those first voices heard, those experiences shared for those of us who don't have the same lived experience. And so the best we can do is listen to learn from those who have had those experiences. And again, it's not easy. It can be hard when you realize how different people growing up, either in the same community or the same province or the same country, how very, very different somebody else's life, and whether it's gender or race, can and has been. And it can be hard to hear how, you know, it could be your family member, it could be your neighbor, it could be your best friend, that, you know, they may never have shared with you how certain experiences that you both had, and you experienced it in a very different way. And so we really do, as a society, I think, have to take that time to listen and work together. But again, it's crucially important. It's not limited to just government, though. It is about society, and I think it's great, again, to see students here raising the topic, drawing attention to it, again, acknowledging and recognizing that, again, systemic issues, systemic racism, they do exist in our systems. And if I may say, I think if you read social media and some sectors, you know, there are people who still say, not so much, right? When you're hearing lots of references to systemic racism, there are people who are defensive and say, but I'm not a racist, right? And they interpret, or they seem to be hearing, when people are talking about systemic racism as though it's about an individual. And I think it's important, if there's people listening or watching, to make sure they actually understand what we're talking about when we're talking about systemic racism and systemic issues like that. They're institutional. They're not necessarily individual.
Right.
They're not necessarily intentional. They may have been intentional when a policy or a system was built and designed, but it then becomes embedded. And so our way of acting and operating, again, whether it's in government or in other parts of society, it's that embeddedness that is the systemic part of our issue. It's that example I used earlier. Had I not had the deputy minister I had she not said, depends on who you are, we walked through that flow, and it was a very Euro, colonial lifestyle perspective that drew a particular conclusion based upon the experience of myself and others who drafted the policy of how this policy would have played out. But someone with a different background and a different experience said, well, it depends on who you are. And we ran it through, and they would have come to a different conclusion and not the right outcome. Right. And so it informed us to change it. But that's the systemic part. If she hadn't been there, if she hadn't said that, we thought we did the right thing. Like, the policy seemed good. Mm-hmm. There was nothing overt in it that seemed to be, and we thought it was moving in the right direction. But until you put a different lens on it, that's the systemic part.
Exactly.
That no one had the lived experience to know that the outcome would not be the same. And that's, so for anyone who feels when they hear people talking about systemic racism and institutional issues, that is not always saying the individuals in the institution are individually racist. It is saying that they exist in an organization that has policies and processes and decision-making that doesn't always have the full picture, and thus, again, it could be intentionally in an historical context, and but it could be unintentional because you just don't know what you don't know. And so what we're trying to say is we need to do a better job to proactively make the effort to learn and understand that ignorance is no longer an acceptable excuse for us in our society to allow these systemic issues to continue on. So I just think that was an important distinction, because I do know, just reading social media and some responses to news articles that talk about systemic racism, there are still people in our society who think when that's being referenced, they just see racism and they get defensive, thinking it's an attack on the individual. And I just want to make it clear to your listeners and your audience that that's not the case. And if they feel that way, they should really, an opportunity to again, as we said, have a conversation, get engaged, and try to learn a little bit more about it, and not start with the assumption that someone's attacking you. They're attacking the system. They're attacking the structural issues, and I've seen how it can change and change for the better. And I'm really optimistic about that. It's going to be a bumpy ride. We're going to make mistakes. We're going to have issues. But I'm really excited that over the course of the next, that these decisions we make, that these initiatives we start, they are going to have a positive impact on many Nova Scotians.
100%, and that's honestly, I'm loving this conversation. I think it's super important, and especially everything you said in terms of, and firstly, thank you for the distinction. It's important to understand that. It's not a direct attack against a specific individual. It's basically just an acknowledgement, as you were saying, that systemic racism exists in institutions all around us. And that acknowledgement piece, being able to sit back, listen, hear somebody else's experience, and be like, that specific aspect of this policy doesn't work for everybody. And if it doesn't work for everybody, then it doesn't work. And I feel like that's it in its highest level sense, and I'm really getting that from the response. So I thank you for that.
Thanks.
So just a couple last questions, real quick. Firstly,
the questions are quick. If you haven't noticed, my responses are long.
No, but the responses are fantastic. You're doing great. Couple illustrative examples in there.
Did I mention I used to be a professor? The media. If you guys, I don't know if you're in media or not, but. Just so you know, the media in Halifax, the press corps that covers the legislature, I may have a reputation of I think they respect me because I do actually try to answer their question. The problem is I don't do it in a soundbite, which means it's a lot more work for them to try to quote me, because I actually try to give them the context behind the answer. And my communications team always hates it because they have just a soundbite they want me to deliver. I'm like, but that soundbite alone, but you don't have time. They're never going to pick it up. And I'm not very efficient at it. And I think that's that education or part of me. I keep telling people, you can ask one question, I'm going to talk for 75 minutes. That's my class length in the Schwartz School.
No, I think it's fantastic, and at the end of the day, the more we can put out for students to be able to look at, especially now that we're looking at summer election, we're putting out everything that we're doing virtually. Being able to have that conversation and just watch a video and see this, fantastic. Really just gives a better sense. So honestly, going along that same stream of ideas, really, what would your message be to students who are either showing up to the polls now, or maybe even back home watching this in another province, in another country, wanting to just,
Look, you know what? All I can say, number one, and I'll say my engagement and participation here, if you haven't noticed, I'm not trying to sell a vote for me. I'd be happy to have a vote for me. But really my engagement here is, number one, really to get engaged and get out and vote and just become engaged. Some of the students aren't eligible to vote, but that doesn't mean you can't become engaged and informed. I think that's important. Early on with the questions, you know, talk about being, that was my first step. It was just becoming informed and staying informed and about society and what's going on that affects me and my community, and whether it's local at municipal, you know, for students, local on campus, then broader the municipality. I mean, this campus doesn't exist in an isolation, in a bubble. You're part of the town of Antigonish as well. You have students that live off campus in the town of Antigonish. What's happening in the municipality of the town of Antigonish is relevant and affects you. Become informed about that as well. And then you step it back and you say the province of Nova Scotia, and then obviously the country, and then internationally as well. You know, there's a lot happening internationally, whether it's south of the border in Europe, not just because of COVID, but you know, I mean, we saw here in 2015, 16, you know, the Syrian crisis and the challenges and the, you know, the refugees that we've brought here. We've got many families that have settled in Antigonish, an opportunity to learn and listen from them. So, but as it relates specifically to the election, if you're eligible to vote, I encourage you to do so in every election, whether it's your student union election, whether it's your municipal, provincial, federal. Heck, when you get into the workforce, if it's your union, labor association election, vote. You know, I knocked on a door last week, you know, an individual, and they actually said to me, look, I don't, and they actually said, not even my union. I don't even vote for my union. And yet the individual, we had a great conversation. They had lots of interests, lots of issues or concerns. And I'm like, well, so then why not vote? Make that mark. And you know, even if you aren't satisfied with the candidates that are there, spoil your ballot. That sends a message. It sends a message that you're interested and engaged, but not satisfied. But not showing up to vote means that you're not even engaged, that you don't even care. So if you care, cast your ballot. Mark an X for somebody. Or spoil the ballot. Because if there's a large portion of spoiled ballots, that gets reported. And what a message that can send to the candidates and the political parties on the ballot. If it certainly sends a bigger message than just not showing up. Not showing up says you're not engaged. But is it that you're not engaged or you're not satisfied? If you're engaged but not satisfied, we need to hear from you too. And so that's one way where the ballot box can still send that message. So get out, vote. This is, you know, personally not just a right. I mean, we talk all the time about, you know, our right to vote and our democracy and all of these, you know, and how quintessential it is to us. The wars that were fought, the veterans, the lives that were lost, both physically, the physical wounds, but the mental wounds that doesn't really get talked about from past wars, although we're more recognition of PTSD and the harms that come back and haunt individuals in more modern wars. But these were fought for this freedom and this privilege and the right to vote. So I personally don't just view it as a right, because a right you can choose to exercise it or not. I think it's a responsibility. A responsibility to participate, to ensure your voice is heard and the voice of your community. So I can't stress enough. Get out and vote. It does matter. Every single vote matters. It doesn't happen often, but sometimes it comes down to one vote, and it could be yours. So that's really all I can stress. Get informed, get engaged, and cast a ballot.
Beautifully said. And from a voter mobilization standpoint, could not have said it any better. It really just is about getting out there and using your voice. And as you were saying, like, even if it is a spoiled ballot, you are still exercising your full voice for all around.
Now that said, I certainly hope that in Antigonish that people don't rush out and spoil ballots. I hope that because we might be one of the only, interesting side note, we may be one of the only ridings that runs a full slate of all of the recognized political parties. We've got myself as the Liberal candidate, Michelle Thompson for the PC candidate, Morag McGilvery candidate for the NDP, Ryan Smythe for the Atlantica Party, and St. FX student Will Fraser, sorry about that, as the Green Party candidate. So I think those are the 5 recognized political parties here in the province, and we've got a full slate of them running here in Antigonish. So if you can't find someone to mark an X for in Antigonish in this provincial election, boy, do we definitely need to hear from you, because I mean, you've got everywhere on the political spectrum, you've got someone represented and trying to bring your views forward. So if you can't find someone in the 5 of us to mark an X for, then we've got even bigger challenges. So I'm anticipating, or I'm not anticipating many spoiled ballots in Antigonish, but I do hope to see a high voter turnout. And
I'm really hoping that throughout this entire interview series, that really by bringing your guys' platforms, backgrounds, and just a bit about yourselves to that forefront for students, that education piece, that communication piece, really could be the difference between someone feeling like they want to engage in the process and not. So again, thank you for participating in it.
And the challenge to those St. FX students or students more broadly, but I think I've mentioned this, but I don't know if it's going to be in the formal portion, so I'm going to restate it. In 2013, we had the highest campus voter turnout in the province here at St. FX. In 2017, roughly the same number of votes. It was just over 300 votes. Okay. We had 300 fewer votes cast in 2017, which happened outside of the academic year. So it's roughly the number of fewer voters was roughly the equivalent of the campus poll in 2013. So again, your votes do matter. I hope you do cast them, even though we're not going to be in school. Again, there's write-in ballots, there's continuous polling Monday to Saturday, 9 to 6 at the Antigonish Mall. You just need to bring your student ID and information with your address on it, and you can vote. It takes about 5 minutes if there's no lineup.
Yeah, fantastic. And lastly, bit of a controversial one, but what is your go-to pizza place in Antigonish County?
So this is Antigonish, and I was born here. So the Wheel is an institution.
Oh yeah.
So the Wheel is the place to go. As a Xaverian, alumni events and so forth. Although I'll have to acknowledge the fact that there has been an evolution since I walked to this campus, and Kenny's opened up just across from the pub. So I know that more recent graduates have easier access to a pizza place. So I recognize this is a controversial point. I think it's controversial at every alumni event I'm at. People ask, and what I say is, if it's after 3 p.m., it's Wheel. If it's before 3 p.m., so my lunch I'll get at Kenny's. And if it's in the evening, I'll get it at the Wheel. Well, so it depends on the time of the day. I recognize both of them here serving Antigonish and the campus community.
Beautifully said. Okay, well that really brings us to the end of the pre-planned questions and really to the end of our interview. But if there's any final thing that you would like to say or any questions for us.
You know what? I want to acknowledge you guys. Very thoughtful and important questions that you've brought forward. I think it's fantastic that you're taking the initiative to do this project, to inform and hope to mobilize and get people out to vote. If you haven't noticed, I think it truly is really important. And I say and share that even if I wasn't running as a candidate. It's a fundamental belief I have in the responsibility to participate in our democracy. That is fundamentally, when we got back down to why I put my name on the ballot in 2013, 17, and again here in 21. If it's my responsibility to vote, then is it not also my responsibility to run for public office if my community asks me to?
Right.
As I said earlier in the story, my family and I sacrifice a lot. It's the prime of my academic career, the prime of my family life. My oldest son, I've been at this for literally half his life. It's been 8 years. He just turned 16. My youngest child has been born since I've been in politics. So this is the only life she knows. And that life has me spending over half my time in Halifax, while my family's still here. So that's, and this isn't the only career though that requires sacrifice. But it is a sacrifice that needs to be made for the greater good, and that's why I do this. I was at an event. I said it's public service. This to me is not about partisanship or politics. It's about public service. That's what I believe a politician is a public servant. It's just we have different roles and responsibilities as public servants, both in our constituency, in the legislature, and if you happen to be privileged to serve in executive council and cabinet, you have that added responsibility working with your department as well. It's an absolute privilege. It's an honor, and I don't regret it at all. I've been exposed to fantastic opportunities, but I do want to remind people to take this really important voting, because every single name, and I said there's 5 of us here in Antigonish, there's 55 ridings across the province, every single name that's on the ballot has a family and friends and supporters behind them that are working because they care. They care about the individual, they care about their community, and they care about this province. And all we're asking of the rest of our society, the other citizens, is to just take 5 minutes, cast the ballot, let your voice be heard, so that when we get sent, whomever gets elected, we know that the voters are always right. But let's make sure that the voters actually participate. And if that happens, again, I can't thank you guys enough for doing this. And hopefully we'll see that voter turnout pop up this time in Antigonish. And let's show the rest of the province and the rest of the country and the rest of the universities across the country how engaged our students and our youth are.
Absolutely. Could not have ended it off any better myself. So thank you again,
Thanks
Randy, for coming out today. It's fantastic, and just can't wait to and hopefully increase that turnout this year. It's
awesome.
Fantastic.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you. We're good to go.